Imagine waking up one day to find yourself in a room without doors or windows. It's not a dream, it's real. The air feels thick, stifling, each breath heavier than the last, each moment dragging you deeper into the quiet of your confinement. You have no idea how you got here, no recollection of the time that passed, yet you know something critical has changed. Something inside you is different. As you search for an escape, you realize there's nothing to escape to. There's no way out. And then, with the cold weight of realization, you hear the most unsettling thought echo in your mind. What if I am the one who put myself here? This is not a metaphor for your physical surroundings, it's the reality of your mind. Welcome to the world of Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Underground Man. You might know the name, but do you know the depths of his self-inflicted isolation? He's not trapped in a literal underground, but in a psychological labyrinth of his own making. A prison built from shame, self-loathing, and despair. And here's the paradox, the underground man is both the jailer and the prisoner. In fact, he doesn't just accept his imprisonment, he believes he deserves it. This is where we begin, with a contradiction that cuts to the heart of what it means to be human. Why would someone willingly remain in suffering? Why would they choose alienation when connection is within reach? What does it say about the human condition when, faced with freedom, we choose the change we know over the unknown possibility of joy? Dostoyevsky's Underground Man, as maddening and detached as he may seem, embodies a struggle that lies within each of us, lurking beneath the surface. We're all familiar with the pull of self-doubt, the desire to retreat into the comfort of our own darkness, and the bitter familiarity of isolation. But why do we do this? What makes us so desperate to protect ourselves from the very world we seek to engage with? The answer may seem simple to fear. But this is no ordinary fear. It's the kind of fear that feeds off itself, grows exponentially, until it becomes an all-encompassing monster. It's the fear of being seen, of being understood. It's the fear of our deepest flaws being exposed to the light. It's the fear of being nothing at all. But, deeper still, lies the question, what happens when we no longer fear the world outside? What if the real terror lies in facing what's inside, the grotesque mirror that reflects a version of ourselves we would rather not acknowledge? It's not the world we avoid, it's the face staring back at us that we cannot bear to meet. The underground man is not just an isolated figure of fiction, he's the embodiment of a psychological reality we all wrestle with at some point. He doesn't just reject the world, he rejects himself. In doing so, he raises the fundamental question that resonates through all human experience: what is the cost of self-loathing? What if, in our efforts to protect ourselves, we have built prisons of our own? What if the walls are not made of stone, but of our own thoughts, beliefs, and fears? Dostoyevsky's Underground Man doesn't just question society, he questions his very right to exist within it. He makes us ask, is it possible to break free from the cage we've built within our own minds? This is the tension we must confront. And it starts with the uncomfortable truth that, like the underground man, we may be choosing our own misery, all while believing it's the only option left. As you stand in the suffocating silence of your own mind, one question remains: why do we build these invisible walls around ourselves? Why do we often choose to stay in the dark, even when the light is just beyond reach? The answer is not as simple as fear, nor is it the result of any single external force. To understand this, we must look into the depths of human psychology and philosophy, as these realms hold the keys to unlocking the intricate dynamics of self-loathing and self-imposed isolation. The underground man's predicament is not unique, it's a universal experience, one that's been examined by some of the most profound thinkers in history. To truly comprehend his psychological reality, we must first understand the roots of his suffering. The philosophical groundwork laid by thinkers like Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, Arthur Schopenhauer, and Jean-Paul Sartre sheds light on why we so often prefer the safety of solitude to the uncertainty of connection. Carl Jung's theory of the shadow provides one lens through which we can understand the underground man's self-inflicted suffering. According to Jung, every individual has a shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves that holds all the traits, desires, and emotions that we deem unacceptable. It's the darker side of our psyche, the part that we push away, ignore, or deny. But what happens when we refuse to acknowledge the shadow? Jung believed that when we suppress these aspects of ourselves, they don't disappear. Instead, they manifest in ways that create conflict and dissonance. The underground man, in rejecting his shadow, is consumed by it. His inability to integrate his darker impulses into his conscious self leads him into a spiral of self-loathing. He cannot escape from the parts of himself that he has cast into the dark corners of his mind. His prison, then, is not made of stone but of the psychological walls he's erected to keep his shadow contained. Friedrich Nietzsche, too, offers insight into the underground man's struggle. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, the fundamental drive to assert and enhance one's existence, presents an interesting paradox when applied to the underground man. Nietzsche believed that the healthiest individuals were those who embraced life fully, who overcame suffering and adversity to create meaning and value. However, the underground man rejects this very will to power. Instead of confronting life's challenges, he retreats into his own mind, paralyzed by the fear of failure, rejection, and inadequacy. He is trapped in what Nietzsche would call a slave morality, a mindset defined by weakness, self-denial, and submission to external forces. Rather than using his suffering to transcend it, he allows it to define him. This rejection of personal agency is central to the underground man's self-loathing. He believes that, by choosing to withdraw from life, he's protecting himself from further harm, but in reality, he's diminishing his own will to power, sealing himself in a cage of his own making. Arthur Schopenhauer, with his pessimistic view of human nature, would likely see the underground man's plight as an inevitable outcome of the inherent suffering that defines existence. Schopenhauer's philosophy revolves around the idea that life is fundamentally driven by will, a force that creates endless desire and suffering. For Schopenhauer, human beings are bound to live in perpetual dissatisfaction because we are constantly pursuing desires that can never truly fulfill us. The underground man, with his deep sense of dissatisfaction and yearning for something more, embodies Schopenhauer's bleak worldview. His inner conflict arises from the tension between his desire to escape the misery of existence and his inability to find meaning or satisfaction in life. His self-loathing stems from the recognition that, like all humans, he is doomed to an endless cycle of striving and suffering, but without the hope of ever achieving anything truly fulfilling. Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism offers another critical lens through which to view the underground man's predicament. For Sartre, human beings are condemned to freedom, freedom that brings with it an overwhelming responsibility. In his landmark work, Being and Nothingness, Sartre argues that humans are not born with inherent meaning or purpose. Instead, we must create it for ourselves through our choices and actions. But the freedom to define oneself is terrifying. It requires us to confront the reality of our existence and make choices that align with our values. The underground man, however, is paralyzed by this freedom. He is so consumed by the fear of making the wrong choice, of failing to live up to his own expectations, that he chooses inaction. His inability to take ownership of his life and his decisions leads to his existential despair. In Sartre's terms, the underground man is a victim of bad faith. He denies his own freedom, instead choosing the comfort of inaction and self-imposed suffering. All of these philosophers contribute pieces to the puzzle of the underground man's psyche. His self-loathing is not born of a single event or trauma, but rather from the complex interplay of psychological, philosophical, and societal factors. At the root of his suffering lies the tension between his desire for freedom and his crippling fear of it. He is trapped in a psychological feedback loop, a vicious cycle of rejection, self-denial, and isolation. His inability to reconcile his inner contradictions only deepens his despair, leaving him to believe that the only escape is to retreat further into the dark recesses of his mind. But this is where the true tragedy lies. The underground man's struggle is not just about his external circumstances, it's about the internal war he wages within himself. His self-loathing is not merely a reaction to the world around him, it's a product of his own internalized beliefs about himself, about his worth, and about his place in the universe. In his mind, he is unworthy of connection, undeserving of love, and incapable of achieving meaning. These beliefs form the foundation of his psychological prison. And the more he retreats into this false narrative, the more entrenched he becomes in his suffering. The psychological roots of the underground man's self-loathing are deep and multifaceted. They draw from the philosophies of the past, from the repression of the shadow to the rejection of personal agency, from the acceptance of suffering as an inevitable part of life to the denial of one's own freedom. But at the heart of it all lies a question that is as old as humanity itself: what happens when we reject ourselves? The answer, as Dostoyevsky shows us, is profound. When we reject ourselves, we reject the very possibility of freedom, of meaning, and of connection. And in doing so, we build the walls that will keep us locked in our own self-made prison. The underground man's plight is a warning. We must not allow the darkness inside us to define us. We must learn to confront our shadows, to embrace our freedom, and to live beyond the confines of self-loathing. Only then can we begin to break the chains that bind us. When you hear the term self-loathing, you might think of something abstract, an emotional state or a passing feeling. But what if I told you that self-loathing, that quiet, corrosive force, doesn't just exist in your thoughts or in fleeting moments of doubt? It doesn't remain contained to the dark recesses of your mind. It has consequences far beyond what you can immediately perceive. In fact, it seeps into every corner of your life, often without you even realizing it. The underground man, locked in his own web of shame and rejection, provides us with a chilling example of just how deep these consequences can run. At first, it seems like nothing more than a private affliction, something that exists within the confines of your own mind. But here's the stark truth: self-loathing doesn't just isolate you from others, it distorts your very perception of reality. Every interaction, every relationship, every opportunity that comes your way is viewed through the lens of your own inadequacies. It's like looking through a fogged-up window. You can't see clearly, you don't know what's real, and you can't connect to what's outside. The underground man, caught in his own bitter cycle of self-rejection, is unable to form genuine connections with those around him. Even when opportunities arise for intimacy, he pushes them away, believing himself unworthy of such relationships. He doesn't see others as they are, he sees them as reflections of his own torment. This is one of the most insidious consequences of self-loathing. It isolates you from your own humanity. You begin to view yourself as a mere shadow of what you could be, and everyone else as a reminder of that inadequacy. But isolation, while profoundly painful, is only one of the consequences of self-loathing. The more deeply you internalize feelings of worthlessness, the more it affects your behavior in ways that are invisible to both you and others. The cognitive biases that shape human perception, such as confirmation bias, self-serving bias, and negativity bias, begin to distort your understanding of reality. These psychological filters cause you to selectively focus on negative experiences, to ignore evidence that contradicts your beliefs about yourself, and to reinforce the idea that you are, in fact, incapable of achieving anything meaningful. Take, for example, the way the underground man interprets his interactions with others. he isolates himself, not because the world is rejecting him, but because he believes, deep down, that he deserves to be rejected. When others show kindness, he misinterprets it, either dismissing it as superficial or viewing it with deep suspicion. His own beliefs about his worth cloud his ability to see the world as it truly is. And this distortion is something we all experience in varying degrees when trapped in a cycle of self-loathing. Neurologically, self-loathing has its fingerprints on the brain's reward system. Studies have shown that when we experience negative self-judgments or shame, the brain's emotional centers light up, activating areas like the anterior insula and the medial prefrontal cortex, regions associated with self-reflection, distress, and emotional processing. But the more we engage with these negative thoughts, the more these neural pathways are reinforced. It becomes a feedback loop. The more you feel worthless, the more your brain strengthens the connections that reinforce that sense of inadequacy. These neural changes do more than just shape your thoughts, they also affect your behavior. The constant stream of negative self-talk and self-rejection can lead to depression, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of apathy. Your motivation falters, your energy wanes, and you retreat into the safety of inaction. This is where the underground man finds himself, unable to move beyond his own self-imposed paralysis. He has internalized his shame to such an extent that it manifests physically. He cannot act, he cannot change. And it's not just a mental prison, it becomes a physical one. But these consequences go beyond the individual. Self-loathing doesn't just affect how you view yourself, it also affects how you engage with the world. A person trapped in a cycle of self-rejection is less likely to take risks, to step outside of their comfort zone, or to pursue meaningful goals. They become passive observers, watching the world pass them by. The underground man, for all his intellectual depth, is paralyzed by his fear of failure and his belief that he cannot succeed. He knows he is capable of more, but the weight of his self-doubt keeps him locked in place. In society, this kind of self-loathing can have a ripple effect. People who feel unworthy or incapable often withdraw from social participation, reducing their contributions to their communities, workplaces, and families. This isolation feeds into a broader cultural narrative of individualism, where people become increasingly disconnected from one another. The more isolated we become, the more we retreat into our own minds, perpetuating the cycle of self-doubt and self-rejection. The underground man's isolation is not just a personal failure, it is emblematic of a larger, collective issue, one that permeates societies driven by individualism, competition, and performance. What's even more troubling is that self-loathing isn't something that's easy to recognize. It often operates beneath the surface, influencing decisions, actions, and relationships in ways that are hard to pinpoint. It's like a poison in your system. It slowly seeps into every part of you, altering your thoughts and behaviors without you even noticing. You might not even realize that your failure to act, your inability to connect, or your fear of failure is a result of internalized shame. And by the time you realize it, the damage has already been done. So, as you watch the underground man spiral further into his own mind, remember this: his story is not just about a man trapped in a dark, physical space. It's a reflection of what happens when we allow self-loathing to control our lives. The consequences are far-reaching, affecting not just our relationships and careers, but our very perception of ourselves and the world. This silent force is not something we can afford to ignore. Because, like the underground man, if we don't confront it, it will continue to shape our reality, making us its unwilling prisoners. And so we are left with this sobering thought: the walls around us are not always visible. They are often made of the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we carry about our worth. The consequences of self-loathing are hidden in plain sight, and only when we choose to see them can we begin to understand how deeply they shape us. Let me know when you're ready to continue, and we'll discuss how to break free from these chains. What if the key to escaping the labyrinth of self-loathing doesn't lie in the world outside of you, but in a radical shift of perspective? What if, in order to free yourself from the chains that bind you, all you need is to face the very thing you fear most, your own reflection, your own truth? It sounds counterintuitive, even frightening. After all, haven't we spent so much of our lives running from what we don't want to see, hiding from our darkest parts? But herein lies the profound irony. Freedom doesn't come from avoiding the pain, but from embracing it. The real rebellion is not against the world, but against the distorted perceptions we've created of ourselves. The underground man, suffocating in his self-imposed prison, believes that his suffering is both unavoidable and justified. He clings to his isolation as if it's a protective shell, fearing that if he steps outside of it, he will be exposed, vulnerable, and unworthy. But what he doesn't realize is that the true prison is not the outside world, it is the world he has built within himself. This is where the rebellion must begin, by challenging the very foundation of his, and our, self-loathing. The first step in breaking free is understanding that the walls of isolation are not made of real barriers, but of the stories we tell ourselves. The narrative of unworthiness, of not being good enough, of deserving to suffer, it's all a mental construct, a set of beliefs that we have internalized and accepted as truth. But these stories are not immutable, they can be rewritten. The key is to begin questioning their validity. Imagine, for a moment, that you could stop believing in the story you've been telling yourself, that you're too broken, too flawed, too incapable of change. What would happen if you took those thoughts and held them up to the light, exposed them for the lies they are? It's terrifying, isn't it? But here lies the first revolutionary act. You don't have to believe everything your mind tells you. Self-loathing is not an unchangeable fact. It's a pattern of thinking that can be deconstructed and replaced with new, more empowering beliefs. But this isn't just about changing your thoughts, it's about changing your relationship to those thoughts. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And to do that, you must embrace your authentic self, flaws, shadows, contradictions, and all. The underground man's greatest mistake is his refusal to accept the totality of his being. He fights against the very parts of himself that make him human. The rebellion, then, begins with self-acceptance, not the kind that allows you to remain stagnant, but the kind that enables growth. Acceptance is the soil in which transformation grows. This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight. It requires a deep commitment to change, a willingness to confront the darkest corners of your psyche and acknowledge the pain that lies there. You may not have the answers at first, and the road may be long and uncertain. But as Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This is the essence of the rebellion. When you cannot change your external circumstances, you can still change how you relate to them. And in doing so, you free yourself from the grip of self-loathing. There's power in action, specifically, in taking small but intentional steps towards something greater than yourself. The underground man doesn't act because he believes he's incapable of making a difference. But real change begins with even the smallest action, however insignificant it may seem. It's in the decision to reach out to someone when every part of you wants to retreat. It's in the act of trying something new, even though the fear of failure looms large. Each step, no matter how small, is a rebellion against the idea that you are unworthy of happiness or connection. Radical thinkers throughout history have understood the importance of action in breaking free from self-imposed limitations. Take the example of Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued that human beings are condemned to freedom. In his view, freedom is both a gift and a burden. But rather than succumbing to the fear of making choices, Sartre believed we must actively engage with our freedom and create meaning for ourselves. For him, the act of choosing was itself an act of rebellion against the pressures of society, against the expectations of others, and most importantly, against the constraints we place on ourselves. But what happens when you don't act? When you retreat further into isolation, allowing your mind to reinforce the idea that you're incapable of change, that you don't deserve the freedom you long for. The underground man's life is a tragic example of the consequences of inaction. He chooses not to act, not because he's unable, but because he believes his actions will be meaningless. He is paralyzed by his own internal narrative. And this paralysis is what ultimately leads him to despair. However, the rebellion against self-loathing isn't about defying the world at large, it's about defying the internalized beliefs that have kept you small, that have made you believe that you are unworthy of love, connection, and success. Breaking free requires rejecting the notion that you are defined by your mistakes, your failures, or your perceived shortcomings. You are not your thoughts, and you are not your fears. The only thing that defines you is your ability to choose to step outside of the narrative you've been trapped in, to choose to act, to choose to be. This radical shift in perspective is not easy, and it may not happen all at once. It's a journey, a series of small rebellions that, over time, begin to erode the walls of self-loathing and self-doubt. But in every step you take, you become less the prisoner of your own mind and more the creator of your own destiny. As we continue on this journey, let us remember, the most powerful rebellion is not one of external conflict, but one of internal transformation. When you begin to reject the false narrative of inadequacy, when you choose to live in alignment with your true self, you unlock the door to your own freedom. The question is, will you dare to step through it? When you're ready, we can explore the ultimate truth that awaits on the other side, an insight that has the power to redefine everything. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the edge of a vast, open field. It's quiet, almost unnervingly so, yet there's a sense of calm that radiates from the stillness. For the first time, you realize that the chains you've been carrying for so long are not real. They were never real. The weight you felt, burdensome and suffocating, has dissolved into the air. All at once, you see the truth. You were never bound by the world outside you. You were bound by your own perceptions, your own beliefs about who you are, and who you were meant to be. This is the ultimate truth, the realization that the power to transform your life has always been within you. The walls you've built, the barriers you thought were insurmountable, were nothing more than illusions. The underground man's struggle, as consuming as it seemed, was not about escaping a physical or external reality. It was about confronting the internal war that rages within all of us. And once that war is recognized for what it is, an illusion, freedom is no longer a distant dream, but a present reality. This is the truth that Dostoyevsky's underground man, despite all his intellectual musings and profound insights, could never fully grasp. He spent so much time looking outward, searching for reasons why the world was unkind, why life seemed so hopeless, that he never thought to turn inward. He never questioned the beliefs that kept him trapped in his own suffering. The irony is that he had the power to free himself all along, but he was blinded by the very thoughts that imprisoned him. This is the ultimate realization. The power to break free from self-loathing lies not in changing the world, but in changing how we perceive ourselves in relation to it. But this is not an easy truth to accept. It requires a seismic shift in how we understand both ourselves and the world around us. For years, we've been taught to externalize our suffering, to look to the circumstances of our lives, the actions of others, and the systems we live under as the sources of our pain. And while these factors undeniably play a role, they are not the root cause. The root cause of our suffering lies in how we internalize these experiences, how we react to the challenges life throws our way, and how we perceive our own worth. Take a moment and reflect on the narrative you've been living. How many times have you allowed the external world to dictate your sense of self? How many times have you felt inadequate, unworthy, or powerless simply because of how others treated you or because of the outcomes you couldn't control? The truth is that these external factors only hold power over you if you allow them to. The real battle is not against the world, but against the stories you tell yourself about who you are. Now imagine, just for a moment, what would happen if you let go of those stories, the stories of inadequacy, failure, and fear? What if you stopped believing the lie that you are broken, that you are too much of a failure to ever succeed? What if you began to embrace the reality that, in this moment, you are whole, you are enough, and that your past does not define your future? This is where the true power of the rebellion lies. It's not in fighting the world or trying to bend others to your will. It's in freeing yourself from the mental constructs that have kept you chained. Once you release yourself from the need for external validation, once you stop looking to others to define your worth, you unlock the door to self-empowerment. And in that moment, you become the master of your own destiny. But this truth is not about perfection. It's not about always getting things right or always feeling confident. It's about accepting the truth of your humanity, that you are flawed, that you will make mistakes, and that you will experience pain and suffering. But this acceptance does not make you weak, it makes you powerful. By embracing the totality of who you are, both light and shadow, you stop being at war with yourself. You begin to act in alignment with your true self, unafraid of failure, unafraid of judgment, and unafraid of the vulnerability that comes with living authentically. This is the ultimate truth. You are not defined by your flaws or your mistakes. You are defined by your capacity to choose who you want to be in every moment. The underground man's greatest failure was not his suffering, but his refusal to step into his own power, to make the choice to live freely, to take action despite his fears, to accept himself fully, and to move forward. And that is the key. The power to transform your life is in the choices you make. Not tomorrow, not in the future, but right now. It's in the small, deliberate actions you take today to align yourself with your truth. This realization, this moment of clarity, is transformative. It shifts everything. It's as if a veil has been lifted from your eyes, revealing a world you had been blind to. You realize that you were never a prisoner, never bound by anything but your own mind. The real question, then, is not what has held you back, but what will you do now that you know you have the power to change? So, step out of the shadows. Look at your reflection, not with judgment, but with compassion. See the beauty in your flaws, the strength in your vulnerability. You have always had the key to your own freedom. And now, you can choose to unlock the door and step into the life that is waiting for you. This is the ultimate truth. You are enough. You are worthy of love, of success, of happiness. And no amount of self-loathing or external rejection can take that away from you. The only thing that can limit you is the story you continue to tell yourself about who you are. So, rewrite that story. Embrace your power. And let the world see you for who you truly are. The final question is this: what will you do now that you are free? This is the moment where everything changes. And with that, the chains are gone. The underground man, trapped in his own illusions, is now free. The same freedom awaits you,